Let's do a 2-round Superflex rookie mock draft based on Kurt Popejoy's 3-round NFL mock draft via the Draft Wire. And this is going to be, guys, how I view the consensus's reaction. And then I'll provide my own commentary as we go. At the 101, look, it's no surprise. It's Caleb Williams, 101 of the Chicago Bears. At 102, for me, how I think the community will react, it's going to be Jaden Daniels, okay? It's the rushing upside. It's the landing spot. He goes to the Washington Commanders, although it's interesting. You see just after his pro day, Brian Kelly, the coach, kind of Freudian slip threw in Washington at the end of an interview there at LSU's pro day. So is it a done deal? Let me know if you guys think it is in the comments. But Jaden Daniels, I think he leapfrogs Marvin Harrison in the eyes of the community, in a super flex sense at least. You see QBs go top 2. At 3, though, this is where Marv comes back into the fold, and we're talking 4th overall to the Arizona Cardinals. At 4, are we going back-to-back quarterbacks, or I guess back-to-back receivers? Well, yes, we are going back-to-back receivers. We're going with Rome Odunze, who goes 5th overall in this mock draft to the LA Chargers. So I think 2 QBs, 2 receivers. Where do I stand here? I can understand this community reaction, and just in terms of monitoring the pulse and obviously the perception, kind of as we stand right now, right? And just trying to project that out. At 5th overall, though, this is where I kind of deviate, where I think a Drake May to the Minnesota Vikings at 11th. I think maybe there's that stink of, well, oh, he fell in the draft. He wasn't even a top 5. He wasn't even a top 10 type pick. For me, look, it's the Viking situation. It's Drake May, the talent that would make me want to leapfrog and stay consistent, having him as basically my 102. Not basically, my 102. I think that's very fair, but I think he falls a little bit by the wayside, given where Jaden Daniels going 2nd overall, given the receivers and their landing spots. For me, it's Drake May, 102. But I think the consensus, the community, will view him well beyond the 102. At the 106, this is where we go back to quarterback, and we're talking J.J. McCarthy, who goes ahead of Drake May. He goes 3rd overall to the New England Patriots. The steam is building, guys. You hear the Pelissero report. Oh, I'm trying to pinpoint what Adam Peters and the Washington Commanders are doing, and the people I ask around the league in significant front office, meaningful positions and roles are saying the most often answer I get is J.J. McCarthy, 2nd overall. I don't think that happens. But I think he's absolutely in play at 3. He's absolutely in play in the top 5. So he's easily going to be a top 6 pick, I think, in terms of the consensus. And keeping in line, obviously, with how it plays out in this mock. At the 107, this is where we go Malik Neighbors. He slipped a little bit. 107, he goes 14th to the New Orleans Saints. That would be disgusting. That would be very, very not good. Not good, right? You think about Chris Olave's already there. It kind of tempers his upside a decent bit, right? You've got Derek Carr there. We'll see. I mean, you think about Chris Olave and hoping it's a, nice year 3 for him. Malik Neighbors complicates things for both. That's how I see it. At least for Malik Neighbors' upside, and in a consensus, in a dynasty community sense, he falls. I'm not saying it's totally wrong. For me, maybe if you want to go ahead of J.J. McCarthy, I understand that. So if you want to flip him maybe at 6 here, but I just don't see how Malik Neighbors slips out of the top 10. I don't see that happening. But we're honoring it in this 3-round type of mock draft. Chaos, things happen, okay? That's just one of the absolute wrenches thrown into this. At the 108, this is where quarterbacks become a thing once again. We talked about the top 4 in this. Well, QB5 goes at 12. QB6, we're drafting off the board here. We're going with Mr. Michael Penix, is how I think the community reacts. Already very highly thought of, and he just had an awesome pro day, right? He goes 13th overall to the Las Vegas Raiders. I think people are going to be all over quarterback here, and rightfully so. I've been beating the drum of, and check out my latest QB rankings with Penix and Mr. Bo Nix included. One of these guys, there's going to be 5 drafted in the first round. That's how convicted I am. That's what I am convicted in. At 109, for me, this is where I think the community says, okay, we can't let Brock Bowers slip anymore. I think you're going to be seeing Brock Bowers here at, well, in this 10th to the New York Jets. This is becoming the popular landing spot. And look, I like it, okay? I like it. You think, oh, well, Aaron Rodgers, not traditionally. I mean, you've got, I guess, some Martellus Bennett, Jermichael Finley, Jimmy Graham, maybe at one time or another. Some weird, or lack thereof, of tight end history with Mr. Aaron Rodgers, but Brock Bowers is more than that. He's just a unique player, and I think the community says, look, we can't let him slip farther than this. Although, for me, I'm taking Mr. Bo Nix, who goes 12th to the Denver Broncos. I'm taking him right where Michael Penix goes in that 108 conversation. Okay? I think I'm maybe higher on Bo Nix than the community is. I think for me, I slightly prefer Bo Nix over Michael Penix. But I think in this draft, in the spots, you think of the Raiders a little bit more sexier than the Broncos as a team fit for any quarterback. But just give me Bo Nix. This is a great value at the 110 in terms of how I think the community reacts. The 111. At the 111, this is where it rounds out, I think, some receivers and almost a sub-tier of receivers. I think we see Adonai Mitchell taken by the community here at the 111, going 34th to the New England Patriots. So basically, Mr. J.J. McCarthy's wide receiver 1. Who goes 112, rounding out the first round? Well, it's Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas going 30th to the Baltimore Ravens. I think the community just doesn't like the Ravens as a landing spot. Not saying that's totally right or wrong. How to make sense of it all? For me, I think, look, I would lean Adonai Mitchell over Brian Thomas Jr. I know Brian Thomas Jr. has been my receiver 4. Mitchell has been wide receiver 5. And I think the talent differential is marginal enough that the situation, that the opportunity really for a Mitchell usurps Brian Thomas Jr. slightly here. And I agree with that. So I just don't see, you've got Zay Flowers there, you've got Mark Andrews, you've now got Derrick Henry there. Obviously, Lamar is a talented enough quarterback to support a Brian Thomas Jr. But I just think that offense, Brian Thomas isn't necessarily as primary of an option as I think an Adonai Mitchell surely is. In, of course, a lesser offense, but still, I think he makes the most of his opportunities. And I think that they're just more than a Brian Thomas Jr. So that's the first round of this mock, guys. Kicking off round 2. This is where we start to see running backs. And for me, I think the community will view Jonathan Brooks going 69th overall to the LA Chargers as easy RB1. Although I think Mr. Jalen Wright, we can draft him here. Jalen Wright, I think, makes quite a case to be RB1, going 87th to the Dallas Cowboys. Although I am going to agree with this community consensus prediction. I think Jalen Brooks slightly over Jalen Wright. Or Jonathan Brooks, sorry. Jonathan Brooks over Jalen Wright here. With Brooks, I'm just believing in the talent. I know he's recovering from the ACL, that injury, but with the Chargers, and what the historical identity of a Greg Roman, of a Harbaugh, of course, just give me that slightly higher draft capital and that better situation. Although Jalen Wright very well having that more immediate type of impact. And then maybe you see an initial window to really kind of capture some sell high on a Jalen Wright. So this is where at 203, the community really just picks a guy that they love, who I'm not maybe haven't been as high on. Troy Franklin here goes 203. Troy Franklin to the Carolina Panthers at 39th overall. And so, look, I understand this. I can't hate this. For me, this is when it starts to get crazy, starts to get ugly. There are so many receivers, and how do you make sense of them? And I think this is a really good exercise to predict how I think people are going to react, but how I would hold firm best in my view. Not saying Franklin is totally the wrong pick here. At 204, though, for me, this is when we start to see, look, some really weird receiver landing spots. I think Xavier Worthy still goes here. He goes 43rd to the Atlanta Falcons here. Xavier Worthy, look, like the player, don't love the spot. I think there's a lot of weapons. I think Drake London is easily that wide receiver one there. I think you've got, of course, Bijan. You've got Kyle Pitts. So I look at Xavier Worthy as a third receiver option on that team with a Kirk Cousins who's very fantasy supportive. Just don't love it. I think the community likes the player maybe a little bit more than I do here. And at the 205, at the 206, this is when really landing spots, I think, start to interject because some of the players we like, we'll get into Ladd McConkey, Roman Wilson, or really Keon Coleman. Some of the spots start to be a little bit murky. And so I think a player like a Mr. Jacob Cowing shoots way up. 206, he goes 60th to the Buffalo Bills. So we recognize it in this draft. And I think, look, there's always going to be one or two guys that you just don't see coming. And I think in this case, it's Jacob Cowing going second round draft capital to the Buffalo Bills. That's when they start to address weaponry for Josh Allen in terms of adding. And look, I get the community reaction. I think it's just a little bit of a reach here, as I think it would be a little bit of a reach for a Mr. Jalen McMillan going to the Kansas City Chiefs. But he goes all the way down, still a top 100 pick, but at 95 overall. So I think, look, you've got, of course, Rashee Rice. Now you've got Hollywood Brown. I just don't really see Jalen McMillan having necessarily that path to what Rashee Rice's rookie year was. And getting, honestly, equivalent, similar draft capital, I think, in terms of your rookie drafts to what Rashee Rice, where he was going. I just think it's a little bit maybe of an overreaction. But not to say Jalen McMillan's a bad player. I just think, for me, there's some players we'll get into here, but I think the community is still going to be lower on them. So I think the community here at the 207, look, we're sticking in the receiver train. I think the community likes a Roman Wilson to the Colts. Roman Wilson to the Colts at exactly pick 46, so top 50. So I think people are going to be all over that. And look, I like Roman Wilson as well. I like him as well. I think this is fair for me. I think, if anything, I'm considering him above Jalen McMillan here. And I think the community likes a Mr. Xavier Legette here at the 207, or 208, rather. 208, he goes 51st to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so I'm honestly preferring both Xavier Legette, both Roman Wilson as well, over a McMillan to the Chiefs as a guy who's maybe a third option, clear number two options, right, with these receivers who get significantly better draft capital, but just the spot's not as sexy as Cowing, as McMillan. And look, especially if, look, Stephon Diggs, the odds are set for him to be with the Bills easily. Then I think it's Wilson and Legette over Cowing, and I think it's arguably over a Worthy as well. But I just think spot and player where the perception pre-draft carries over from a psychological standpoint. And people don't quite want to recognize the player who they like, but not so highly thought of. They don't love the landing spot. So for me, I think at 209, this is where the community says, look, I'm not going to let Ladd McConkey fall anymore when he went 38th to the Tennessee Titans. And look, for me, I think this is fair. Okay, it's a fair reaction. Again, Similar to guys that went like a Xavier Worthy, don't really see him as a primary receiver weapon there when you've got a Calvin Ridley and you've got a D Hop, right? I like what obviously what it means for Will Levis. I just for Lad McConkey's fantasy relevance, not the greatest, not the greatest. I think the community at 210, they let spot and the team dictate things. But for me, I like the player. I like the spot. It's Ricky Pearsall here at the 210. And honestly, I'm all over Ricky Pearsall right in and around where Troy Franklin goes. He walks in as a clear wide receiver one, the primary option potential there in New York. And look, I know, let's say, okay, it is Mr. Daniel Jones. I think there's a lot of disrespect there. It's a similar deal with Adonai Mitchell, okay, with Ricky Pearsall here. The quarterback, it's not going to be viewed so highly thought of, but I like the player and I like the opportunity because how do you score points? You get the ball thrown to you. If there's no one else around you, you know you're going to get schemed up some targets. And given the draft capital, we're still talking number 47 overall to the New York Giants here. So for me, this is a big value for Ricky Pearsall based on how I think the community reacts here, given the receiver distribution. We're talking 3, 6, 8 in a row go. And I think the community goes back to the running back position here. They go to Trey Benson, who goes 97th overall to the Cincinnati Bengals. I think, look, they've already signed Zach Moss to a decent contract in running back terms, multi-year, around $4 million per. And they've got a Chase Brown there already. A little bit murky. I think, look, with Benson the player, though, I think this is fair. You're betting on the player to potentially usurp, rise above the competition, which I think he's totally capable of. I just, based on that barrier to entry, that barrier to fantasy relevance in terms of the competition there, I think can't really draft him any higher, much higher than, say, for me, 208, 209. You include 5. I think there's at least 5 receivers here. You got to draft above a Trey Benson in this, barely top 100 draft capital to a decent offense in theory, but there's guys there, there are signals there, and it doesn't really make sense. I don't really see the Bengals doing this, but we have to operate in this world. And so, look, last but not least, Malachi Corley going 59th to the Houston Texans. Would I pick him here at the 212? Sure. If anything, look, I'd even consider him slightly higher, above a potential Trey Benson, around 210 range. I think I'd understand it, right? There's just so many receivers here, and it's even still a headache for me trying to make sense of this all. Trying to make sense of all these receivers, where they've gone in this mock. Obviously, look, the sheer quantity is there. It absolutely is there. And there you talk about omissions. We're still not including guys like a Keon Coleman who goes 75th to the Chicago Bears, like a Jalen Polk who goes 76th to the Denver Broncos. So he's a guy, look, I think he could easily be, wide receiver too. So if anything, if you want to put a Jalen Polk, he's one of my guys. I think he just misses the cut from the community sentiment, but I think he's absolutely going to be worth a second round flyer, a late second. You've got Cortland Sutton there. You got a Marvin Mims, but I think Jalen Polk would work quite well with the Bo Nix and with that Broncos, that Denver system in general. So, guys, this is the 2-round mock. If you want it, look, link in the description to the draft wire. Some absolute chaos takes place. Here, and I've tried to best make sense of how I think the community reacts while also trying to be grounded in how I view these players. And just to recap, we talk about values of a Drake May here at the 105. Bo Nix here at the 110, right? Ricky Pearsall in the second, where he is. A Leggett, where he is at the 208. There's so many receivers. People are just, it's going to be so variable. It's going to be so volatile. And so it's so tough to pinpoint where exactly I think the community is going to land. I think I fall back on, look, there's the perceived players and how people have liked them for quite a long time, but there's obviously ultimately the draft capital, right? And how that dictates things. Then there's the really shock factor of the cowings of the McMillans receivers who maybe we haven't been so high on or thought of as top 10 type of receivers, but they get drafted accordingly. And look, I can't say it's totally wrong, out of touch, given their opportunity and their situations. Have a great weekend, guys. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.